Hello, this is Dirt, son of Earth. You're about to watch a conversation between myself, Terry Tapp, and Mike Watson, where we discuss power, politics, and art from an acid-left perspective. We're going to touch on making art during the era of capitalist realism and how to survive that. We will also go through a detailed analysis of one of Terry's works and one of my works. This conversation was hosted on twitch.tv/leftcanmeme, where we regularly host conversations along with live VJ sets with music of a philosophical and psychedelic nature. Enjoy.
So basically we were on here 1 week ago. We talked about acid communism. We talked about terminologies around acid communism, particularly how do we feel about the term communism and how do we feel about the term acid, and how do we feel about these two terms being put together as they were by the late Mark Fisher in his unfinished book, the introduction of which was published in 2018 by Repeated Books in the Mark Fisher Compendium. So Fisher basically argued that we need to kind of construct a new virulent working class movement to raise consciousness of class issues, much like the movements of the 60s to 90s, which have been denied to those of us who grew up too late. And Fisher saw this as maybe the only way of reversing what he termed as capitalist realism. It's basically the idea that there is no alternative to capitalism and that our whole reality is structured by the mechanisms of capital. So we're here to consider today art and politics. So the relationship between art and politics. Can art help politics? Can art somehow help the left achieve its aims? So we had a little slideshow. I think I'm going to improvise a bit more than I intended, actually, because of the technical issues there. But just quickly, let's address this idea of capitalist realism, and maybe I can throw it out to Adam or Terry. How convincing is this idea that as it was put by Frederick Jameson and Slavoj Žižek, and this is a quote that they both used, or they both formulated separately, which Mark Fisher picked up on. What was the quote? Help me here.
It's easier to imagine the end of the world than it is the end of capitalism.
Yeah, exactly. It's easier to imagine the end of the world than it is the end of capitalism. So what does that mean, and why might it worry us? Anyone?
I think in our politics, we don't have any spaces we can move into. If you look at the debates, the presidential debates, or the primary debates in the U.S., you're still moving in between possibilities framed in a capitalist society. We can't seem to come up with any sort of radical other solution than to reconfigure the elements we've already been given. And I think, given what Mark Fisher was trying to say, is that this notion of acid, this notion of permutation of boundaries, or of removal of boundaries, on our conception at least, would allow us to come up with some actual alternatives. They have existed before, but we don't seem to be able to think of a way of getting into them.
Yeah, I mean, to what extent is this linked to a very kind of should we say base level Marxism, but a kind of Marxist fundamentalism? To the idea that we are basically objectified by capitalist processes, by being a labourer who works merely for profit. Who is kind of a cog in, to use a cliche, a kind of cog in the industrial capitalist machine. To what extent is Fisher's kind of hypothesis that we live in a world completely beholden to capital, is it linked to this idea of objectification?
Oh, that's an interesting question. Yeah, do you want to start, Adam? Or do you want me to?
So it's, I think actually Fisher goes beyond because of the constraining of the mind of imagination. I see a lot of talk about desire in Marx's work, almost in a Deleuzian way. So I would be really hesitant to say that it relies too heavy on that kind of framework, because it's not just the Marxist future that is canceled in capitalist realism. It's all of them. Even the more anarchist visions of the 60s or the more utopian visions of the past are canceled in capitalist realism as well. You know, you see 60s visions repurposed as capitalism, as things for commodity. We have mindfulness practice and things like that, where they become just a corporate tool of de-stressing, taken away from their religious roots.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose that's one thing. So there's one aspect that Mark Fisher out from Karl Marx and from maybe some of the people that came between Marx and Fisher is this analysis of consumerism and the way in which left symbolism is appropriated by capital, and the absurdity of this. And he talks about Kurt Cobain, I suppose, is one of the standout kind of passages of capitalist realism, when he talks about this, the kind of equivalent of the protest movements of the 70s and 60s and prior to that, being, I suppose, grunge, but that's kind of complicated, but more particularly Nirvana themselves, and this Kurt Cobain character who's so obviously very sincere, but who gets totally kind of misappropriated by the system. So I suppose the thing for Fisher is, not unlike Adorno, who we'll get onto later, but perhaps a bit more extreme, is that even you know, the passages of culture or the elements that you would expect to resist end up almost being put out there as a parody of themselves from the offset. So I mean, I don't know, I can't recall the exact passage on Nirvana, but however sincere they were treated as if, or only made possible in the kind of mass culture sense, because it was kind of envisioned that they would be kind of sold out from the offset. So it leaves a position where, you know, there really is no alternative, because anything we try and do is kind of preempted and maybe even preordained by the capitalist system as a means of portraying some kind of tokenistic gesture, if you see what I mean. That you think you're doing something that's resistance, but a capitalist machine can assimilate it because it's already foreseen it as a useful tokenistic gesture that can excuse its excesses.
Well, you know, it seems like on a very practical level, if we're going to look at art as enabling us to conceptualize a way of life away from capitalism, we're almost just going to have to get rid of an exchange of money for art. Because once you begin to actually have any sort of idea of profit or of commodification of your work, you've already given over to an objectification of yourself within a capitalist system. You know, I mean, it's a very basic point, but I think the fact that we can't seem to conceptualize being an artist without making money from your art, then we're already trapped in this.
Yeah, I mean that might be true. I'm just thinking of other kind of systems or other approaches that try and circumvent the objectification of the artwork. So for Adorno, there's this idea that the abstract artwork can resist better than the figurative artwork. That there's something in capitalist processes that involves categorizing things. The whole kind of the problem with industrial capital is really a problem with the human tendency to want to kind of own things or to kind of try and kind of ward off the danger of objects by naming them, by giving them measurements, etc., etc. So Adorno says, well, this same problem is reflected in the art that you make when you paint a tree, for example, it's back into the tendency to control, whereas abstract art, being kind of unintelligible, maybe can lead us kind of out of this kind of trap. So, I mean, one of the points, one of the reasons I asked you both to give me JPEGs is that Terry makes figurative art and Adam makes abstract art. So we could maybe think a little bit about your respective approaches, how you think your own actual artworks maybe might contribute to some kind of better society. I mean, it's kind of an overblown idea, but I mean, you know, why you do what you're doing, and how it helps you somehow, and then respectively, you know, what the respective benefits of an abstract art as opposed to a figurative art making. So I don't know if we just run straight into it, because it may be easier to speak about something concrete. So the first thing I'm going to come to is actually Terry's. So let's do Terry's first. So there's one of Terry's. There's a work called Lungfish, I guess, which I can pull out over here. Okay, so this is obviously a painting. Or maybe it's actually a drawing. It's obviously 2D is what I've intended to say. But yeah, but tell us, what the medium and how you did it, and what you were.
It's a large-scale charcoal drawing. It's almost 4 feet high, and it's part of a book, if you want to call it that, of giant drawings, 20 giant drawings that tell a story, like a comic book, except that they're almost all splash pages. There aren't panels to them. And the text on this one, the one I sent you doesn't have text, but the text on them is embedded. So sometimes it's very legible, sometimes less so. They're when they were displayed in Manhattan last year, they had the text beside them, so you could read it. But the text is, of course, in the drawing as well. This is the only page completely without, and it tells a story relating to the nature of time, growing up in the South, climate change, elements of working a lot of shitty jobs, just a story that you would be able to read, except since it addresses the nature of time, human evolution as well as biological evolution itself and climate change. The laying it out as these giant drawings that kind of interlace imagistically and thematically in terms of the text also gives you the impression of a non-linear time, if that makes sense.
But the non-linear time is trying to challenge something about the time that we inhabit, the temporality we inhabit, or what's the?
Well, when you go to a gallery, or this is I'm still trying to get this made into a book. There's an actual almost comic or line art version of it as well. But when you experience these things, you experience them on the clock, so to speak. You go through almost like your work day, like the signs of the cross. You have a number 1, a 2, a 3, and then you make your way. If you're looking at a museum, for instance, you go through and you're led toward an exit, essentially, just like in a work environment. Going through with a gallery where each piece interrelates to the other pieces, almost holographically, as a theme. You don't experience the same kind of workplace time, if that makes sense.
Excuse me 1 second, sorry.
All right.
Yeah, I mean that it certainly makes sense. Yeah, I'm thinking. Well, of that thing, the argument that figurative art somehow repeats the kind of restrictions of society, or the kind of false way we think and we try and categorize nature and our surroundings. I think this is a bizarrely modernist argument anyway. It harks back to a time when people really believed that that somehow, firstly that there was still a really kind of strong opposition between between left and right, that the arguments, these kind of arguments, was when there was a kind of a fascist. There were fascist governments that were quite definitely fascist, and there were communist governments, and they just fought a huge war. There were polarities like there still aren't today, even though we're moving towards those kind of polarities again, arguably. But people really linked art making to those polarities. Everyone had an opinion. You weren't like, okay, I'm neither communist nor fascist. That wasn't really possible then. Everyone was taking a stand of some kind. And you know, these artistic isms, they really kind of felt themselves to be somehow linked to political struggle, and that's how you end up with people saying, you know, one can't paint or draw a figurative artwork. It's going to play back into the horror of World War II or industrial subjugation of man or something like this. And then they say, but you know, abstract art on the other hand is going to free us. Now that now sounds quite absurd, but also, you know, it sounds strange to us because when you think about making art as part of the left-wing project, you're talking about something that should kind of help aim towards freedom. So it seems like a lot of baggage to kind of add to this, to say, yeah, you can make art for the left-wing cause, but you have to do it like this and not like that.
Right.
So to our ears, that it sounds kind of strange. But I suppose that the abstract argument that Adorno was making is that when something is completely unintelligible, it can kind of like push you in a new direction, which is bizarrely similar to kind of drug culture. But Adorno, of course, wasn't involved in drug culture. But the two arguments, like looking at abstract artwork, you can get lost momentarily and you forget your false boundaries, is a bit like taking LSD. You can be momentarily lost and you forget your boundaries. Probably for quite a while afterwards, but they're not the same argument. But somehow it's similar. But sorry to interrupt. But there's something in your work that seems to be on that trajectory, and that's where you're messing around with narrative. So like you don't have like an ABC linear narrative or you know, ABC.
And a lot of the imagery too is broken up. You know, I see Adorno's point as more applicable to a very specific time period, like. A lot of the non-objective abstracted work in galleries and museums today is extremely commodified, and it's I know you're talking about two different things here with categorization and commodification, but I see you know, a definite link which he was trying to put in as well. And when I go to a gallery and I see, you know, the fairly standard non-objective approach of at least a lot of New York galleries, they're really just digestible pieces for investment. If those same pieces had been created in 1949, I think their impact and their place among commodities or the anti-commodity would be very different. It's like surrealism. Surrealism fits so well of that surrealism of that time period fits so well into advertising, and when it was created and for a while after, it didn't at all. It was very jolting.
I think commodification is definitely an issue. I suppose that's kind of where we started with you know, the point that nothing escapes commodification, but I suppose we somehow expect art to, because the whole point about art is that it's illusory. So you know, it's always pretending to be something it's not. An artwork is always claiming to be something it isn't. Otherwise, it's quite useless as art. Even when you have an object in a gallery that's just the object. So you put an apple in a gallery and you say that's art. That's pretending to be art when it's just an apple. So it's inescapable. There's always some kind of illusory element. So you'd hope that it could escape commodification, and that's maybe the kind of greatest trick that art plays. That even when it's sold, it still pertains to be something more than just an object for sale. Even when it's in an auction room, there's blatantly this kind of play off between people who want to own this thing for its investment value. There's still this kind of thing of, well, it's art. It's not, you know, a load of cattle being sold. But
it plays a different role, and I think in terms of what we're aiming toward with this notion of an acid left. What we want is a reinvigoration of the role of art. I mean, it's not even that art is sold or not. It's that, I've forgotten who said this, but the quote sticks with me. Art is to society as dreams are to the individual. Dreams don't do anything, but they almost exist as a nose cone. If you're looking at yourself as a rocket, they lead into this visionary future that you're going to have. Even if the visionary future is, just another day or a hike, a relationship, it's an emotional space. It leads, the dream life leads the individual to the future. And as art, regardless of if it's bought or sold, art as a whole leads or doesn't lead, depending upon if it's actually functioning, to me, us to the future. And I see that's the tie-in with capitalist realism, because with capitalist realism, there is no future. The future has been canceled, I believe was Fisher's line. So if art is functioning correctly on this account I'm trying to give, it is leading us to an understanding, even if it's an emotional understanding. It doesn't have to be an architectural plan for some socialist, actual urban scape. But if it can push us somewhere, like that drawing is part of a set of 20 drawings and a large drawing for a cover. It's in part talking about dealing with rural life and looking at ourselves, not only people living in a rural situation, but people living in reflecting on us and looking at our role in evolution and reconceptualizing that. So that our ability to see ourselves economically and our ability to see ourselves on a performance level is very different. So I see, whether it's figurative or narrative or non-representational, I see art being that. And so when you have surrealism of a time period or non-representational work of a time period, if it's been gobbled up so that the dream life of art has no function now, other than to be traded, then it doesn't matter what type of categorization or what type of heading we want to give to the art. If that dream potential has been sucked out, then it's ineffectual anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I can see that's what an absolute commodification would do. I mean, I suppose the thing is that if you know anything about art, if you hang about in art circles, and I suppose I don't mean you, but I mean if one hangs about in art circles, because obviously you do, it's very clear that the art world is deeply commercial, but it's not just even deeply commercial like the act of selling food or selling some other kind of essential commodity. I mean, there's two things happening. There's the one that, there's the artwork's claim to be beyond everything, and that's kind of what I was saying earlier before you last spoke, before you just finished, or before you started what you just finished. I mean, there's the claim that it is above everything and it's autonomous from everything, and then there's this thing of it being actually in the kind of the officialized contemporary art world that revolves around very respected museums, very respected magazines, galleries, collectors, curators, that it's actually all about finance. That works are bought for large amounts of money only because they're guaranteed to then make lots more money. So you have the extreme of something that is ostensibly beyond any kind of financial value, because this would be too petty, and because art is something otherworldly, and then you have that same thing being precisely only about monetary value, and it's reflected. This is reflected the whole way through the art world. This contradiction in the way that gallerists pertain to choose artists that they genuinely believe in based on like this certain je ne sais quoi, they can't explain what it is, but there's something special, or they're supporting young emerging artists from the area or some other crap, which would be perfect if they were, but this is not what they're really doing often, or not what they're doing solely. And then there's a critic that writing objectively what they really feel, but they're being directed towards certain exhibitions by magazines that are taking money from certain galleries, and so on and so on. So this contradiction runs deep, and it's very hard to take it seriously on any level. And this, it goes beyond something just being capitalist. It's a betrayal of sorts, given what art pretends to be, or could be.
Yeah, I agree.
So, it's tricky. If you're an artist, or if you're involved in the art world, if you came into the art world, as I say, just to get this in my book, Can the Left Learn to Meme? You go into the art world, you go into art college with certain aspirations and dreams, normally that you're going to express yourself, that you're going to follow a path of self-discovery. You're some kind of dreamer revolutionary. This is why everyone went into art, I think. This is why Van Gogh went into art, Michelangelo, throughout the ages. But, quite quickly this you get dissuaded from this path. You get taught to laugh at that kind of naivety. But many of us still hold that dear, or I think that's the best if you go some way into the art world and still hold on to that dream. Why not? But if you still hold on to that dream, you'll probably end up not making the most money, and carrying a lot of disappointment around with you. I kind of dealt with it because I kind of moved out, so I only have like one foot, but actually only like my big toe on my left foot maybe is still in the art world. Otherwise, I feel myself to be a lot more, in the kind of online media world, and crossing over into politics. So as how I end up talking to you two here, and I can still hold on to my credential, or not my credentials even, my belief in a certain value of art. And I don't know how you two approach it, but that's, I think because art is still there. One can still make art and do art, and we don't have to be too worried about what this highly contradictory system is doing, or a hypocritical system. Adam, to bring you in, so how do you feel about all this? How far in the art world have you ever been, and how much do you care?
Well, I would consider myself an outsider artist. I did not go to art school. I had a lot of friends that went to art school, and I would hang out with them in my early 20s. And, often I would be like, oh, your homework looks really cool, and kind of get into that. And that's kind of how I started making art. I used to think of myself as primarily a poet. And then once discovering visual art, I take that autonomous route, often experimenting in so many different ways and trying new things, art as something higher in an expression form. But, the abstract art is so easily commodified. So the art world itself, the official art world, I'm not very much in, but of course I want to be able to show my art, to display it. It's great to sell art. I sell t-shirts and stuff like that. That's what is that? It's the same thing. But at the end of the day, I guess part of me doesn't care about those contradictions, kind of like you were saying. I do care, but in a way, almost like recognizing the prison that you're in order to get with this, to do something with it, you kind of have to recognize that you can't completely make art and give it away on the street to have any effect on the art world. You have to recognize there's rules to the game, and follow them, if not play with them, and try to exploit them to get something better out of it, to play with those contradictions, and see what can be done with them. You know, like, so someone said something about how we were, what did they say? Art existing outside of commodification is delusional when a discussion about leftist art has to be hosted on Twitch to get an audience. And, you know, that's funny. I get it. But also, you know, I use a lot of my digital work is done using these tools provided by platforms, taking GIFs that are available on Instagram, using the pre-editing or pre-edited filters, combining them, slowing stuff down, combining it again and again to create these abstract, disjointed kind of experiences through the, you know, definitely not what they want to be providing those images for. You know, like putting, I don't know, a Taylor Swift gasping on top of Terry Tapp's shoulder is probably not what they had envisioned when, you know, Taylor Swift gasping was added to the Instagram GIFs. So, yeah, I don't know. I care about the art world and take it seriously only so much. I view it as a bubble that's going to pop, you know, through the financialization of abstract expressionism and probably conceptual art, like the Hungry Artist or the banana that spawned the Hungry Artist. I can't remember the name. I see that as an art bubble, but also, you know, I wouldn't not participate in Art Basel if I got invited to showcase some work there down in Miami.
Yeah,
So,
I mean, this is fair enough. I mean, I've participated in a number of commercial events, and then even if they were non-commercial, the big museums, they buy off big collectors, you know, and the galleries have some hand in influencing what's going in museums. So I don't think there's a non-commercial kind of part of the art world. And I suppose, I mean, this is difficult because, you know, when people do big things, you know, and people like make big efforts to make things happen on a grand scale or any scale, it can seem kind of pointlessly negative or over picky to say, yeah, but it's all about money, it's all about this. I mean, all these forces converge, and then you can't really do things without money. So I don't know that, you know, that an artist should not be in Art Basel, you know.
right.
All I can say is that I've never really seen things really challenged from within. That I've seen much more what Fisher's talking about in terms of culture in general, of people being sold out to the system. All the political artists I know, I don't think any of them.
That's true.
I don't think any of them are really very convinced that their politics, their political art is going to like make a big difference. And there's kind of perhaps an embarrassing silence, but not even embarrassing silence. Maybe a knowing grin or a shrug if you approach this issue of, you know, can you even change the art world? Because there's one thing, can we change the world? You know, you have to start with little steps. Do you ask a scientist to change the world? I mean, it would be naive if you met one at dinner saying, okay, so what are you doing to change the world? You might be super interested to know what this scientist is doing to change science in their own corner. Thinking about this in art, I think it's very difficult to change the art world. If you think about John Berger, the late critic who made this series and book Ways of Seeing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he says this line I quoted again in my book, Can the Left Learn to Meme? And he says the art of any period tends to support the interest of the ruling class. Okay, I actually think I said in the last talk we had, but I like the quote. So basically, you know, when he says the art of any period tends to reflect the ruling class's interests, then you think, well, maybe that's what art is. I mean, he's not really leaving any room for manoeuvre there. He's telling it like really, really straight. That's what you're dealing with. I think it's a bit like you're dealing with money, and you could say, well, it's got the Queen's head on it in England. The money has the Queen's head on it. What do you expect from money? And this is kind of biblical. There's this kind of give unto Caesar what is Caesar's. But I didn't really want to get biblical at this point. But this is what we're playing with, perhaps. And then maybe you dip into it, you make some money, and you get out. Or you dip into it periodically. I mean, I must say I can't say I'm really out of it, because I'm still writing reviews for major magazines, rarely, to be honest, because it doesn't pay so well. But things come up that I'm involved in, and yeah, I mean, I don't know where one should position themselves, but I mean, it's interesting, this comment about Twitch. And this guy's now saying it's not an accusation of hypocrisy. No, it's not. Now this is someone else. Lefleur 79 talking about art outside of commodification. Oh no, it's the same point. Okay, so art outside of commodification, as Adam was saying, is delusional when you have to talk about that on Twitch to get an audience, and then he says it's not hypocrisy, he or she. Or one of the other many genders. It's not about hypocrisy. It's just a matter of fact. Okay, so when it is a matter of fact, I don't think anyone's denying it, both in the art world and on Twitch, which is why I'm kind of getting stuck in my last point, because I don't think there's really an answer. I think we could hold our hands up and say, yeah, okay, we're part of this, but we're trying to change it, or we'd like it to change. And I think you can extend that to everything, because look at the wars going on. Yeah, I oppose the war, but yeah, my taxes are actually going in some form towards the various war efforts that have happened over the last decades, involving America and Britain and other Western nations. There's always this thing of every single thing we do, if we're going to be like really honest, we're wrapped up in it all. Just by spending money.
Yeah, I think of it kind of like I'm not gonna change the world by making art like directly, but I'm also not gonna change it by my wage labor job. So if I could support myself in some way, that didn't involve that, it would still be of benefit to me, and then maybe to the art itself. But then, the real question though is going to, if we wanted to change the art world, getting into changing some of the expectations and then also the way we produce art, what we're doing. And I think this is, you've talked about it before, Mike, in your book, about like against direct political representation. So I think, even though I keep staring at this image that you have up of Terry's work. I mean, it's representational in a sense that it's not complete abstraction, but there is, to me, like a bad trip element going on here. This shit is brutal. I'm looking at it, and there is some there is psychedelic elements, there is abstraction, there's like surreal elements going on in here that twist perception in a way that is much different than political art as like like protest art of that you might see. If that makes sense. This is probably not something you would see held up at a protest rally, like just a sign of this placard. It would be so far different from the protest art that would be surrounding it.
Well, your point about if you work a wage labor job, if you work any job, and you make money, you're participating directly in the perpetuation of the system, the reproduction of the system. And if you were to make money from making art, you would still be participating, but you would also be doing this other thing. You can look at certain forms of art that actually have contributed, I think, to a deepening of our society, a broadening of our conceptualization, our values. If you look at the underground comics from the 1970s onward. Those really changed people's attitudes. I know of a lot of people, I was a kid then, but me in the 80s, 90s, reading these comics, it was a way of talking about a certain set of values, a certain set of politics that you couldn't really talk about otherwise. And it wasn't interesting to me, especially at the time, to be able to talk about them in an academic setting, in an essay, and locked in with the American, federal politics. Those ideas had no play at all. If you look at I don't know if you're aware of the book Film and the Anarchist Imagination. The author makes this argument that culturally, a very far left idea of human freedom has won out. And I think you see that in the arts. And to me, even though, you have this horrible commodification of the art world, and the art world itself just sucks, really. You also have a bit of a triumph. If you go back to Bouguereau, you go back to France in 1870, you don't have the kind of painting that you can have today. And you may think, well, so what? I can paint, but I'm dealing with income inequality, climate change. But it's one victory, and it's one way of beginning to look into that as a victory. There are lists that circulate around New York City where you can go and see all types of underground performances, underground parties, underground puppet shows, underground exhibitions, and most of them cost very little. So the money is not the main thing, but the experience that you take from it is the reason, the raison d'etre, whatever, the reason for it to be. So even though that doesn't, change society in a grand way, it is a victory. And if I were fighting a giant and I was able to land a nice hook onto it, a punch, I would at least examine that moment when I landed the punch and take whatever was in there to use as a foundation for further punching, if that makes any sense in this context. It's hard to come up with something that, we're really, the idea of an acid left, we're trying to come up with a way of moving forward in a cultural and political evolution. And so, when I ask if I'm making sense, and I'm thinking if you're making sense, it's trying to talk about something that's not even quite here yet. And it almost, to me, I feel the strain on the vocabulary.
Okay, I mean, what an acid left art would be, I don't know. I think it's an interesting question. But I don't know if there is an acid left art. It might have nothing to do with the content of the art or even the way in which it is created, but maybe the way in which it's circulated. And it could be that, yeah. It's a valid point, yeah.
Yeah, so I think that's why the surrealists developed all these games, to play that would produce art, trying to break away from some of that. Or like the argument for autonomous art, which not all of my art's autonomous, but a decent amount of it is, or I use a little bit of autonomous technique like route, where you're almost entering these meditative states to produce. Those break out of that, but I think in a different way that maybe doesn't have that left push, or doesn't take into consideration the art world today. They were attempts to fight that at that time, but through, various things, through capitalist realism, those types of things have been brought back into the fold and are pretty easy. You can buy at Barnes and Noble the book of surrealist games and play those. So,
well, look,
go ahead. I was gonna say, I guess that's that cycle and that pushing and contracting. But maybe we should do another image.
Yeah,
I didn't give you this image, but I can in a different context. But do you know what the chick, what do they call them? Chick publications, chick pamphlets Word. Okay. If you're watching and you're not American, I think they're specifically an American phenomenon, and they're old. They're still around, but they're like a Volkswagen. The connotation has changed. A chick publication is a little like 5-inch by 3.5-inch booklet, and it's a comic book, but it was produced by right-wing religious fundamentalists in the U.S. Jack Chick produced the original ones, so that's why they're called Chick publications. And they would give you some horrible message about why you should be a homophobe, or why nature is demented. It was all some crazy, very right-wing, fascistic message in them. So a couple of years ago, I made 100-something drawings, and I created a set 1 through 5 of the same format chick publications, except they're called the Young Philosopher's Field Guide to Reality. And they were meant to be, even though now they're sold and sold for a lot, they were meant to be given away. You could buy 100 of them, and you put them like chick publications in a bathroom, in a truck stop, a gas station. I saw one on a floor of a grocery store in the mountains in New York State a week ago. But you give them, and they would take a concept like the concept of work or the concept of reality itself, and you could give them to a child, or you could give them to your friends. You could find them, but you read through it in this little toilet reading, really, and it costs almost nothing, and you're and this is the old way of saying it, but your mind's blown. All of a sudden, you can't look at symbols in the same way, or time, or work, and to me, that little bit of a use of art for that purpose would be much more like an acid left.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure how much that links to your prior point, because I was just thinking about your prior point and answering that. But tell me if you see them linking. But you were talking about the kind of the mode of exchange perhaps being more important than I guess you mean than the aesthetic, or how we exchange artwork, how we conceive of a kind of new art economy could be more important than the particular style for acid comedy.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to dictate an aesthetic to anyone, is where I would be coming from.
But yeah, that's interesting because that requires a level of community building and a responsibility towards the community that's much greater than the average artist holds. And I just wonder, if you look at everything that's acid communist, I mean, acid communism effectively only really exists online, apart from occasional kind of meetups, conferences, seminars, etc. I mean, I haven't been to any. I'm not sure there have been any in Finland anyway, but there have been a few events in the UK, I understand. But what I mostly see is meme production, and that seems to me quite an individualistic pursuit. Even though the meme is very open, one does not have to be from a certain social class background to make a meme. We do have to have mobile phones and internet access to make internet memes, okay, but that's kind of like something most people can have access to if they want in the Western world. So let's just say within the Western world is very open. The meme culture is more open than the art world. The art world, you often feel an outsider if you don't come from a middle class background. Yeah, meme production is again individualistic. It's something people do on their own. Maybe they're looking at getting certain internet hits. They want to get a certain amount of recognition. I don't see it as yet a community thing.
But I think your point about community is vital, though. Maybe we should be having acid left festivals.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's kind of seems to be what Fisher was pointing at, and maybe there's ways of organising. There's ways of organising that. But yeah, as you're talking about, maybe we need an alternative art economy more than certain ways of making. Then I think, okay, that's great, but it requires us to make the community first, and these communities. These things are hard to make. I mean, in any case, what Fisher was saying about we need to make a new counterculture, you know, why that maybe hasn't actually happened, despite the massive interest in asset communism, is one does not simply make a counterculture. I mean, I'd love to make a counterculture.
But your idea of having spaces, a physical meeting of some sort, festival, exhibition, whatever, I think that's a foundation for building a counterculture.
Yeah, and I think that there's something in internet culture which is exemplary that could kind of lead us to work out how to make a real life counterculture. It's not all
Speaking, hey, I'm about to lose power, by the way, so I may fade in a minute, and I don't have a charger near.
Okay, well, that will be a sad moment. I mean, to see you disappear like that, and I guess we have to assume that's what's happened if you suddenly disappear.
Or I've been abducted.
Yeah, that could also happen. So, I mean, it's something we can work towards when we talk again. But yeah, there's something in internet meme culture which I find very positive, and it's exemplary of how we can make a real life situation. It's not the real life situation in itself, but maybe we can use these forums to organise real life happenings. But more importantly than that, what you're saying is that, you know, we need to think about the economy rather than what we're making. You know, if we could make if we could make things happen in real life, we could speak about that. We could speak about what would be an alternative art economy, and it would be great. And I think that's what we should be driving towards.
Maybe we can use assetleft.org, which will be up, you know, soon, as a facilitator for what you're calling an art economy. I like that term.
Yeah, I mean, this website you're talking about, that could be a good platform for us to try and mobilise. I mean, I suppose the thing with the internet is what's really great is you can mobilise people in different countries. That's what we're already doing by speaking, and we're all involved in this kind of thing a lot. But you know, one can also, you know, one can use that kind of mobilising people who are dispersed to make happenings take place in different places simultaneously, or kind of rolling happenings. So you can have something in New York, and next something can be happening in Helsinki and London, etc., etc. So there is definitely a grounds upon which we could build a movement, but it remains that movements have always been organic. I don't know to what extent the LSD movement was fabricated, or obviously there were people who had strong political interests there who were kind of pushing it in certain directions, but still I think movements
have been organic, but are they, you know, if you look at the Working Men's International, it was an event, you know, it was a meeting, and they planned it. I mean, but it was drawing upon energy that was in the air already. So I don't see, if we had festivals, meetings, where it would be any more or less organic.
Well, I suppose what is organic, but that's like we're getting to what is free will, which is a whole different thing.
Very different stuff.
The point at which someone says what we really need now is a counterculture is not the point at which the counterculture starts, and it's never going to be the same each time. So saying we want something like the 60s, 70s, 80s or 90s is a far cry from having something, and in any case we have completely different conditions. We have to see how it will grow up, how the internet would affect this kind of thing. I mean,
and surveillance
we can talk. I'd love to make a counterculture tomorrow, today, whenever, but I suppose we could just use the tools we have to try and make at least small happenings happen.
Right. I like that. Well, I think maybe we should look into that then. You using this format and the upcoming website to facilitate, maybe not creating a counterculture, maybe that's not the right word, but facilitating its emergence into real space.
Yeah, making things happen on some level. I suppose that I mean, the ambition of making a counterculture capable of forging class consciousness is to be lauded. I mean, I love that kind of statement by Fisher. As Terry Tapp's been abducted, I hope he's okay. He looked like he fell. Not only did his phone go.
Strange.
Okay. Well, I do hope he's okay, but I mean, what he's saying is good. And the ambition of Fisher is really something. And we have that text, the introduction, which is published by Repeater Books, to work off. But it remains to do something, which is something quite different. So I mean, the acid communist movement is wonderful, but it needs to push. And then some guy in the chat here, guy or girl, DX27S, they're wondering if what we're talking about has already happened in vaporwave. Okay, now Adam's gone missing as well.
I don't know. I don't think I know enough about vaporwave's early formation to really compare how they differ from, I think, what we're talking about. But I think you could, from what I know of it, I think there's, an argument there. At least, like, parts of what we're talking about. But, we do want something completely new, and bringing it, using and utilizing the internet, but bringing it off of the internet as well. It has to be mixed. It has to be in real life as well. It has to be affecting real communities all over.
So by now people are seeing, or will be shortly seeing, both Adam and me and one of his paintings, collage, also on screen. And we finally worked this out. So I mean, how do you think this kind of does anything? I mean, what's it do for you? I mean, you're making it, you're kind of politically active, but you're not presumably thinking this is changing anything. Is it more of a personal thing? Is it something that's doing something for you, or is it exemplary?
Well,
yep, go on.
So, what was that?
Is it? Well, I was just carrying on, but I was going to let you start. I mean, I suppose there's one argument that making art is somehow exemplary because it's an activity that in itself is kind of a positive meeting between humans and materials, and it doesn't end violently or anything. So, as an activity, if we were all making it, we would be better off. So something to be said that you lead by example by making art. But anyway, that's just something I was throwing out there. But what for you is the benefit of doing this?
Yeah. So, there's definitely a personal element to it. I don't really like to hide the fact I make art primarily because I like to. It feels nice. I have a constant need and desire to be making stuff and experimenting. And, but there is something there, I think, with the inherent, ideological quality to the work, probably because of, the politics that I'm interested in, what I'm reading, the things I'm experiencing in the world, trying to reflect those back in a way that pushes those boundaries, that expands some stuff. And it's heavily abstracted. So, I start off quite often with these types of pieces with the knife painting without considering a further composition, and then allowing that knife painting, which is, like an action move, all through itself. So then allowing that, once it's created, to dictate the rest of the content. I look at it and kind of allow myself to see things within it, and then go through the collage material and kind of let it call out to each other, which so removing some of that intentionality, I think, brings it into that autonomous zone where you're allowing these combinations that aren't so rational to play with one another. Then, of course, there's the political quality of the work itself that's being sampled. The text is clearly from a socialist book, and Audrey Hepburn is actually a fairly political person. We know her, a lot of people nowadays, as being really pretty and being the Breakfast at Tiffany's lady, but she was an anti-fascist, and beyond being an anti-fascist, her parents were fascist sympathizers, so she really rebelled, and she could have lived an easy life and not cared about that, but she chose to use her art and what she gained from her art even before that to fight for what she believed in. So there's some qualities there in image, but those, as far as Audrey goes, you kind of have to know that, or maybe it prompts you to look at that. Then the rest of it is meant to act as a disruption to someone, in art, someone in a coffee shop. So I mostly show my work in places like coffee shops, sometimes bars, occasionally an art gallery, but more often it's on those fringe locations, more just businesses. And having someone encounter that in the public, hopefully sparking something in their brain to make them question elements of their own thought and of society as it's being, as they're within it at that moment. So and I think it has a very playful quality to it. They're dancing, which is, the title "Dance as If No One Is Pulling Your Strings." That in some way is also a product of association. There's dancers in it. Audrey also looks almost as if she is in a, not a crucifixion. It doesn't look, to me, have religiousness to it. The skewedness of her arms kind of bring it into a puppeteer, and that's where I got that idea from. Is almost as if she looks like she's being puppeted, but there's no one pulling her strings. There's no strings there, so it's kind of that dance as if no one is watching, but subverted to this idea where, to kind of combat some of that paranoia, because, maybe you're being controlled, but if you are through these things, there's not necessarily someone pulling those strings. And I wish I had the ability to, here it is. I could not find this earlier. So, I wanted to read the words that were on there. Do you want to say anything before then?
No, I think, okay, I would say something, but if you're going to read the words, then that would be great. So you go ahead.
Yeah, I'll read these words, and then I would like to hear your comments and what you think about all of that, because I think that kind of ties it together a little bit. So the painting, the mixed media piece, for people, it's a lot of my work is about this size, partially materially because the canvas is cheaper. I do really love working on large works, but I'm dictated by what I can afford and also what I think will be able to sell. If I love making these huge works, but it is much harder to actually sell those. So they're talking about the pressures of the market and commodification there. But so, yeah, with these works, they're highly detailed because of the knife painting and the intersections of colors and these small collage pieces. It does cause you, if you want to really engage it besides a passing image, that you have to kind of come up to it. You have to look at it and, be more intimate with it than, maybe a standard portrait. So anyways, the words that are on here are: become a saint for the superstructure. Begin with the most extravagant garments. Everything is performance. Social construction. Our existential anxiety lies. Reminding the reader. Responsible for recent times. Dictatorial mentality. Still vivid. Entrusting a such justified utopian therapy. The new universal. Certainly, situation emerges, and it's official. Then things get a little strange here. We have this piece, which in the metal square that is three-dimensional that comes off, it says inspire. The rest of it, I'm going to read as it reads. More in deter, are, enough that, henceforth, of fantasy, kind, this therapy, D, of cultural, auto-reference. This is indeed general, as in liti or impassa. 56, worth, is no longer bloody lessness and authoritarian, horror, and who's anyone at the prospect of control moving.
Well, it's pretty. I mean, it's something. It's different looking at a work like actually in the flesh, so to speak. But I mean, I could still see it there, and it helped me understand it better. And it's something kind of far out, having you read the painting like a poem on Twitch. So I think it's a good thing. It's kind of an artwork in itself. I mean, one thing that strikes me about your work quite often, and this piece is no exception, is the way it clearly kind of it references collage, kind of avant-garde collage around the Cubist period. And that was a process of a bit like Terry was doing with his drawing, of trying to disrupt temporality. So this thing of collaging, of taking things and sticking them on canvases or boards, maybe mixing that with paint. Well, it did two things. It was kind of a formal gesture aimed at reflecting the kind of jilted sense of temporality in the industrial age. So we think that we're in this kind of jilted temporality today. People were saying also in the early 1900s we live in a jilted temporality, also in the 1800s, basically in the industrial period, something about the speed of modern life, the new working day, I suppose, public transport, mass media, the speed at which images were arriving much faster than they were before, different influences, etc. This led to a sense of things being fragmented even before we got onto postmodernism, where people really said that linear time is fragmented. So the collage is a way of kind of fragmenting space and time to convey that. The other thing was, by sticking stuff on canvases, you were getting away from the idea of painting as an illusion. So there was this idea historically that the painting was kind of something transcendental. It was something that people trained in the church, or trained with a view to working for the church, would do, and then they would paint these kind of other worlds which you would aspire to reach, sort of like heavens or biblical stories, which kind of taught people that perfection is not here, it's out there. So that the painting was like a window onto perfection. But when you get into the modernist period, it's much more about portraying reality and trying to kind of throw the spotlight back onto the everyday, onto the materiality, rather than some kind of transcendental spiritual dream or aspiration. And collage was part of that. This thing of putting like train ticket stubs, or I think Picasso did that. One of the first things he did with collage, putting ticket stubs or other kind of everyday things, newspaper cuttings, etc., onto a canvas. You were saying this is not a window; it's just an object. It was much similar to what Duchamp did by displaying objects in an art space. So it's interesting that you're doing that, but also that your pictures tend to have like a glitch-like quality, that they look like internet glitches. So you're harking back to a kind of previous kind of consideration of the fragmentation of temporality, but you're also alluding to a contemporary consideration of fragmented space, i.e. the internet glitch. So anyway, that's a lot of things to consider, but I think I don't know if you're aware you're doing that, or if you think about that at all.
Yeah, absolutely. The glitch, I think, is a double fold or maybe triple fold product of the fastness at times at which I'll apply for knife paints, to try to really not think about what I'm doing, to experiment with some of that. But then, as I do that and I see these little things, I learn what little fast movements cause what. So there's, like in this one, as well. There's spots where the paint is very, very thick, and then there's spots where the paint is so thin you can easily see the grain of the canvas, drawing to its objectness. Definitely not trying to hold that illusion so much there, or maybe drawing to an illusion that draws attention to the fact that it itself is an illusion, and that, to question the idea of being outside of that illusion more accurately. And then the fact that where we live, what we do, and living so much online, especially as a content creator, we are, like you and I are online so much. And so those kind of things just kind of seep in. If you want to make contemporary paintings, you can't just paint landscapes. The computer screen, the smartphone screen has become just as much a part of a lot of our daily intake as the actual land has. Much more than television ever could have dreamed of. We know how much television affected art making. I think we're really starting to see that, like what happens after the post-digital world in physical art. Like, it's really responding. And if it's not responding to a lot of those, I don't know. I think it should, I guess.